Buddhassa aparutade sangamata satavaraye sorvanta bamunchantu satang. So, Venerable Ajahn Kalyano invited me to give Dhamma reflection this evening, and of course I haven't been in Australia since for about 15 years, so this gives me an opportunity to see some old friends and acquaintances. And of course, the teaching of the Buddha is now becoming quite respected in the Western world. Countries like this one, which before were very few people knew anything about it or understood it or practiced it in any real way. And of course, now at this time with all the problems of the world, the way mass information is generated, and with modern technology and transport, there's a kind of a worldwide network of communication. And when I became interested in Buddhism, it was in 1955, and then it was difficult for me to find any books in English on Buddhist teaching in the States. And now there's a plethora of books available. Anybody who goes on a 10-day retreat usually writes a book. And so you go to bookshops in London, and there's option paralysis that you suffer from. Which one should I get? The times have changed, and of course, both in countries like this and in the UK, tremendous immigration of Buddhists from Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, Laos and Cambodia come into the country. So I've been living there in England for 33 years now. This is living as a Buddhist monk and teaching and practicing meditation and establishing monastery. And of course all of it is supported on alms, the traditional alms mendicancy of the Theravada school. And this, of course, was a big question when I was asked to go to England. At the time I had great doubts about whether I could survive in a non-Buddhist country as an alms mendicant. But that's not been a problem at all. So it's the requisites and that are in abundance, and the generosity of the people, the English themselves, and of course we track now the European Union from all over Europe, and then the Asian Buddhist communities. But the thing that Luang Cha emphasized was, he always used the word bhatibata, practice. And in a country like Thailand, which is, has a strong tradition for several thousand years of Buddhism, and it's culturally, its cultural base is mixed with Buddhism, Buddhist teachings, and the Theravada school. So you're living in Thailand was a wonderful experience, but you're living in a culture, in a society that is basically Buddhist, and even though they might not practice Buddhism per se in meditation, they have a cultural conditioning to see things with Buddhist perceptions. Well, this is not the case with most of us Western people. Our cultural conditioning is very different from that, not influenced by Buddhism whatsoever. And so it's interesting now to see the amount of interest in meditation, in Bhatibhata, in countries like the UK and here. And also in Thailand, which is a Buddhist society, Buddhist country, Bhatibhata was not particularly what Thai people tend to do. It's so part of a cultural conditioning. It's oftentimes taken for granted to just go to the monastery to make merit or do things to perform ceremonies, but to actually put it into practice. Even the monastic system in Thailand can be very academic, in the study of scriptures and Pali, but not with the practice. So Luang Por Chah emphasized this. And when I first went to live with him, of course, I couldn't speak Thai, and so Luang Por Chah insisted that I attend all the talks. I couldn't be even excused from his long, 5-hour-long dasanas in the evening, even though I couldn't understand anything he was saying. But I would pick up a few words, and one of the common words was bhatibat or bhatibhata. Practice, as it's translated into English. So there's like the Pariyatti, which is the study of the scripture, Pali Canon, the Vinaya, and so forth. And then Bhatibhata is the practice, and Bhattiveti is the result of the practice. So these three aspects are quite significant. We need all three. So we need the scripture, the teaching as it's printed in Pali in the traditional Tripitaka, and then to put it into practice. So in Luang Por Chah's way of teaching, we did the Pariyatti, the scriptural study, but basically with the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the first sermon of the Buddha. And we memorized this sutta, and of course it's chanted, traditionally chanted on the Sala Puja before the entering of the Vasa or the Pansa. But over the years, this particular sutta, of course, it can be just a perfunctory chanting of Pali, not really appreciating the meaning or what's being taught. But when one practices, when one is involved with Bhatibhata, then those words come to life. They're directions, they're skillful Pariyatti Dhamma to apply, to internalize in your own citta, or your mind. So it's not just an intellectual kind of conditioning one is getting, or just a meaningless chant of words that nobody understands, but it actually gives us the direction. And that initial sutta, that first sermon, is a very profound teaching. In fact, I've often considered if the rest of the scripture was totally lost and that was the only thing left, that would be enough. Everything is contained, everything you need to know to practice is contained in that Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. So a few weeks ago, Ajahn Panyasaro, who'd been traveling with me from England, he and I went to Saranath in India. On a Sunday, we were with a group of lay people from Europe and America, and we went to the stupa in Saranath and chanted the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and I felt this strong sense of rapture and pity arising in my mind, thinking that this was supposedly, this is where we consider this first sermon to have been taught 2,552 years ago in Saranath by the Lord Buddha to the 5 disciples, and then to be there so many thousand years later, chanting the same sutta in the same spot. It was a very moving kind of experience for me, anyway. Now it's over the years. I mean, I have 43 years now as a bhikkhu, as a Buddhist bhikkhu, which seems like a long time even to me. But looking back, it doesn't seem very long. It surprises me how old I am, because you don't grow old in your mind. Physically you do, but mentally, especially with BuddhaBodhivana, because you're tuning in to ultimate reality rather than to time conditioning. And so the aim is mindfulness. This is the key word. This is the uniqueness, the emphasis that the Buddha placed on sati sampajanya and satipanya, mindfulness and clear comprehension and wisdom. So this word, mindfulness, the Pali word is sati, is a kind of word, we translated sati as mindfulness, but we don't really understand it. Mindfulness is almost impossible to explain or define. So I remember when trying to just approach the definitions of these Pali words through English translations of Pali, then of course the mindfulness is, just mindfulness, and I didn't quite get it actually, even though I kind of got the idea. And so my early practice when I first started meditating in Thailand was a samadhi. I concentrated my mind. Now I'm used to concentrating my mind. Being an educated person, you learn how to concentrate, and so that concentration I could get, the samadhi, but mindfulness, I thought I was being mindful, but the technique that I first started with, this was before I became a monk, was a method where you do everything in slow motion. So at a monastery, Wat Mahatat in Bangkok, my first meditation experiences were all in slow motion. So when we walked, I had to do it in this kind of a very slow way, and so I connected the word mindfulness with slow motion. And then I began to think, you can't be mindful unless you're aware of every movement of your feet while you're walking, or mindfulness of the rise and fall of your abdomen. And that's just not that the teacher said that, but that's how I tended to hear it or pick up or interpret it. But over the years, suddenly mindfulness, this is the essence of, this is the real essential word, because it's about being awake here and now, being fully present, being open to this moment. It's not about doing something at this moment to get some result in the future, where my conditioning was always to practice, to go to Wat Mahatat to practice meditation to get a good result. Hopefully I would become enlightened in the future. So the initial interest in meditation was from the personality, from me feeling there's something wrong with me and I need to do something in order to get it right in the future. And so on that level I started with ignorance of Dhamma. I had faith in Buddhism per se, I had an interest, in other words, but my initial beginning was based on there's something wrong with me, I'm not enlightened, I need to practice, and maybe in the future I will become enlightened. And so this is what brings most of us into the field of meditation. Now the Buddha, of course, the teachings are about, the mindfulness here and now, awakened consciousness with awakening, not just consciousness operating with all our habits, but consciousness in this very expansive reality of here and now, before we define it or think about it or get caught in our own personal problems or preferences or biases. Now, saying this is fairly easy, but we're conditioned for the opposite. Always thinking or doing something now to get something in the future, or so that I've seen in England, for example, so many people meditating over years with this basic illusion never challenged. So they're quite willing to commit themselves to meditation retreats, and even going to Burma for 6 months, and intensive meditation practices. But the basic illusion doesn't seem to ever be recognized, because there's always this sense of, I'm doing this in order to get something in the future. Now, with mindfulness, then as we investigate the teaching of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths, for example, this was a Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the first sermon after the Buddha's enlightenment. He used this is very interesting to me. Why? Because why did the Buddha place suffering as a noble truth? I used to wonder, why not love or something like that? Why not love as the first noble truth? Because that's very inspiring. Unconditioned, unselfish love is the first noble truth. Why did he take something none of us want and like, suffering or dukkha, and put it in such an honorable category in his first sermon? And so, questioning this, and then practicing with this, is that dukkha is the common bond we all share as human beings. This is why the Buddha's teaching at this present time, even though it's a very ancient teaching, it's not like New Age or modern psychology, it's an ancient teaching. But he understood the basic problem of human existence, which applies to all of us, whether it's ancient India or modern Australia. The suffering is what we experience. I mean, we have to, when we're ignorant of the truth of Dhamma, of the deathless reality, then we're motivated by fear and desire, and we're caught up into the illusions of our societies and religions and so forth. So we operate from this sense of, I've got to get something I don't have, or get rid of something I have that I shouldn't have. So, ask yourself, what's so noble? Why can you call suffering or dukkha as a noble truth? Usually for me, it was always a nasty fact rather than a noble truth. And because I think, I've come from fairly good background, and I can't blame my misery when I was a lay person on being mistreated or deprived in any way. It was all internal, a sense of a self-critical, a very critical mind, very skeptical, critical mind that turned inward and always was emphasizing anything I felt was wrong especially about myself. Very self-disparaging, self-critical, and And so this was like an obsession, a personal obsession. My suffering wasn't because of being mistreated externally, but it was thinking in the wrong way, seeing things in the wrong way. So this suffering, dukkha, as a noble truth, it is, we can all relate to it. It's not about believing in Four Noble Truths. It's not something that you don't have to believe in suffering. You can recognize it. And so when you're cold, you want to be warm. When you're too hot, you want to be cool. Wanting to get something you don't have, or trying to get rid of things you don't like. This is about humanity, being human, whether it's ancient India or modern Australia. It's the same thing. Men and women, we work in that way. And of course, modern life, like in my youth in the States, was always about getting something, never being content, but always achieving, attaining, trying to get something, never, envying others, keeping up with the Joneses. And of course, the modern free market capitalist system encourages us. Advertising is generated, so we're never content. You're not supposed to be content with last year's fashion, but new fashions come up every year to make you discontented with last year's, and it goes on like that. So the society we live in is basically encouraging us to be discontented with what we have, so that we spend our money. And at this time, in the economic recessions in Europe, in England, for example, desperately trying to get the British to go out and spend more money, because to keep the economy going. So the modern economy depends on discontented people who always will go out and spend and get more and never be content with what they have. And then the monastic system, as you see here, represented by this monastery, Bodhivana, Ajahn, is about being content with little. And so, we train ourselves as Buddhist monks, bhikkhus, to be, you can't just make yourself content as an act of will, even though as an ideal you can appreciate the ideal of contentment. But because of the conditioning, from our cultural conditioning, we're not conditioned to be content, but to be discontented. So and then this is like the monastic, what they call samana sanya, the reflections for samanas is, the four requisites, the food dropped in the alms bowl, the rag robe, basic primitive medicinal allowance, and shelter for the night. And then by observing the suffering that we create through being discontented, we can see that the First Noble Truth. When we want better food, better shelter, better robes, better medicine, we become discontented, or we become discontented with the monasteries we're in. I always can think, I'd like to go to a monastery that I think is better than this one. And so the samana trains themselves to, this is a shelter for the night, rather than this monastery should be like this or shouldn't be like this. At least the aim is to be aware of this, to be aware of discontentment. Through seeing the grasping of discontentment, through the Four Noble Truths, not wanting things to be the way they are, wanting something that you don't have, you begin to investigate the grasping of desire, and the results of that grasping is dukkha. So that's why it's a noble truth. It's common to all human beings, and and then it's something that nobody wants. We all want to be happy, and I don't know how many people want to be contented, but they want to be happy. And of course, the idea you take happiness on that level of just getting everything you want, being able to have desires and get all the best, everything that's the best, that you can possibly imagine. If you could arrange life so that you get absolutely everything you want, would you still be contented with it? And even before I ordained, I could see that I would never be contented, even if I got everything I wanted. That I was caught in even when I got things that I wanted, I wasn't content with it. I had a kind of satisfactory moment, was probably the best way to describe it, sense of I got what I wanted, but you can't sustain that, because then the mind is conditioned to look for something else. So in this First Noble Truth, a sense of nobility, what's noble about it, is that now it's placed in a position in which we investigate it. We're not just trying to blame it on external causes or on yourself or anything else, or to eradicate suffering, but to investigate it. So that takes a certain nobility of the human heart, doesn't it? Part of us would like to find happiness and avoid anything unpleasant or miserable in any way. But when there's a kind of maturity in the human individual, where you suddenly look at suffering and admit it, I'm not discontentment, unhappiness, not being content with anything, wanting things to be something they're not, or not wanting life to be the way it is. This goes on and on and on until we start looking at this dukkha that is a noble truth, rather than because we don't have everything we want or everything we desire, or the societies we live in, or the people we live with are not perfect. They've got all kinds of irritating habits and flaws and blamable actions, and so we can live in a realm of being critical, averse, indignant, angry, discontented, unhappy, even in the midst of abundance. So I consider that, the nobility of recognizing it as a truth, rather than blaming one's suffering on external causes. Like some people blame God. How could God allow this terrible thing to happen? It's God's fault, or it's the opposite political party, or it's this group, or this. We can always find an external, something external to blame for my misery. But in this way, I'm looking at my misery, or this dukkha, as a noble truth. It's changing from the worldly way of seeing suffering to this Dhamma way of understanding it. So the noble truth of suffering, the insight, is to understand it. To understand the first noble truth, so the first stage, you have three aspects of each noble truth. The first one is the Bhariyati side of it, which says there is dukkha. A simple statement. It's not saying anything about dukkha. It just says there is dukkha. And then the second aspect is about bodhibodhivana, and that is what to do about it. Practical, not just hey, there is dukkha, and leave it there. But what do you do about it? It gives you the direction to understand suffering. And then the third aspect is the bhati weight, or the result of practice, and you have the insight, dukkha has been understood. So you see, this pattern is a reflective style the Buddha used in his first sermon. It's not just Pariyatti Dhamma, there is suffering, there's the origin of suffering, there's the end of suffering, there's the path. Each noble truth has its Pariyatti statement, and then its prescription, its advice for what to do with it, and then the result from practicing. So in this teaching in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, there is, this was his very first sermon after his enlightenment. Now, when he was enlightened, as written in the scriptures, his first thought was, nobody's going to understand this, there's no point in teaching it. Because there's no words for it. For the enlightened conscious reality of here and now. It's beyond words, completely beyond words. Your mind is blank, but there's full presence. There's awareness, there's wisdom, there's seeing clearly, but it's not about ideas or thoughts or definitions. So then, of course, in the scripture, the Brahma Sampati, which is like the force in the universe, the male kind of energy, the sky god or whatever, said, teach for the welfare of those that have only little dust in their eyes. So Brahma Sampati, very compassionate. There's those with only a little dust, go out and teach for their welfare. So the Buddha followed that advice, and of course on his way to meet his 5 colleagues who had considered him a kind of traitor when he gave up ascetic practices, he realized they were in Varanasi or in Sarnath. So he was on his way to Sarnath from Bodh Gaya, and then he met this ascetic Upaka who was admiring his kind of radiance, and what if you learned that you look so wonderful? And the Buddha said, I am the perfectly enlightened Buddha. And of course Upaka looked with great skepticism and walked away. So that's obviously not the way to teach. Now it was true, the Buddha wasn't telling a lie or anything. That's true. I am the perfectly enlightened one. Because it wasn't Prince Siddhartha or the ascetic Gautama have become an enlightened person. It's a statement using words from the pure state of consciousness with wisdom. But the person receiving it, Upaka, was still caught in the ego, so he just could doubt. He couldn't get it. It just sounded like the man was a bit off, or overestimating himself. Just like most of us would. Somebody comes and says, I'm God, and we think, let's send him off to the mental hospital. So when he arrived in Varanasi, or Sarnath, he changed from I am the perfectly enlightened one to there is suffering, there are the causes of suffering, there is the end of suffering, and there is the path of non-suffering. And notice the difference. It's not about, the pronoun I is not used, there is this statement just of a fact. It's like a fact that's incontroversial. You can't refute it. There is suffering. And everybody has to, whether you can look at your own suffering as something else, but read the newspapers and you say it's all about suffering, scandals, corruption, problems, social problems, drug addiction, pollution, and endless wars and suspicions and paranoia haunt the human mind. There is suffering. What to understand it, not to try to figure out how to get rid of suffering, but to understand it. That this suffering, and the Buddha is pointing to, is ignorance of truth. It's not about taking sides with any political party or any group. Not about one side is right and you should, we're Buddhists are right and all the rest are wrong. It's about awakening to this feeling within your own mind of unhappiness or discontentment or feeling incomplete, feeling lonely, feeling dissatisfied or discontented. And to understand it, it means instead of blaming it, we recognize it. There is suffering is like this. And then the third, the bhati wait, the result of that reflection is the insight part, where this is a kind of gut knowledge. It's not just believing in the scriptural teaching, but you've actually put it to practice and know for yourself. So these are the first three aspects of the First Noble Truth. Then the second Noble Truth is about the causes. There are causes. There's the origin of suffering. Suffering isn't the ultimate truth. It's not a metaphysical truth. It is a noble truth that we use, taking this ordinary, very banal experience. It's not about, being persecuted by tyrannical social system. It's about even the wealthy. Queen Elizabeth suffers a lot. She admitted it a few years back that annus horribilis, when everything went wrong in England for suffering. The King of Thailand, he suffers. Everybody suffers. So this is not a something mystical or esoteric. It's just obvious. So, but in that very change from blaming and not wanting suffering to seeing it as a noble truth, changes the direction from trying to make everything outside yourself, right, so you don't feel suffering, or just being in despair and hopelessly depressed because you just feel like a helpless victim of miserable conditions, which is another easy state of mind to develop. You can see why in affluent countries, why there's so much suffering, because of just, there's not, there's a lot of despair and a feeling of meaninglessness to life, purposelessness. And you don't have it, there's not much to inspire or generate things in your mind other than, trying to get more money or very kind of worldly, materialistic goals. Get power, prestige, position, fame, whatever. But even if we get all these, the suffering still continues. The causes of suffering, then, it's stating, what are the causes of suffering? And it is the ignorance of Dhamma, of the truth, ignorance of reality itself. And so we operate in its ignorance, then we're caught in this ignorance, so that whatever, how we live our lives, we're living it with these desires. We're caught in the desire realm. So you have three kinds of desire. Gama Danha, which is like sensual desire, which is quite obvious. You see something that's beautiful and you want it. And so you follow, you grasp that desire for sense pleasure, and then and of course then you suffer accordingly when you can't get what you want, or even when you get what you want, you can't keep. It doesn't really have any lasting happiness for us. So God, the sense world is, what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, has this sense of the pleasant and the painful and the neutral. And notice how much of modern life is about seeking beauty and pleasure, fulfilling all the sense pleasures, delicious food and pleasant odors and good physical feelings, pleasurable physical feelings and beautiful things to see. And then of course we have this memory. So unlike the animal kingdom, we have a retentive memory, which we have to remember things. So, you remember, and so much of what we remember is oftentimes the suffering of the past, when we were mistreated or blamed for something we haven't done, or or things we've done that we shouldn't have in the past, we feel guilty about. Things we shouldn't have said. We were mean or nasty or cruel or selfish, and then we remember that throughout our lives. Or the abuse and unfairness generated towards us when we were children, or school children, or students, or relationships with others. We have to remember so much of we have so many unpleasant memories. And then also we remember usually the successes, when we received graduate with a degree, or when we were given a prize, or had a wonderful experience. But most of our life, isn't it? Most of daily life of an ordinary human being is neither particularly pleasant or painful. It's about just ordinary, getting up, sitting down, walking, lying down, putting on your clothes, taking them off, eating, sleeping, urinating, defecating, waiting for the bus. I mean, most of our life is on this level of, waiting for something, or just doing the ordinary routine things of daily life, that we don't remember. We don't remember doing any of that, but we will remember any extreme condition, whether it's extreme pleasure or pain. And looking over my lifetime, I can remember so much of what I remember. I can remember some real happy times and the pleasure of certain, the kind of nostalgia for childhood and things like that. Or I remember only being quite a happy child till I started going to school, and then I began to suffer. Going to school was not a pleasant experience for me. And before that, I can only remember, I have quite pleasant, happy memories of early childhood. And then growing up, being in the military, a lot of unpleasant memories of that, and pleasant ones, and so forth. Then in monastic life, I look back when I first ordained, went to live with Ajahn. I know I suffered a lot then, because, life was not particularly easygoing, and he didn't make it easy for us. And having to learn another language and live in such a kind of basic way. But now I just think I kind of feel nostalgia for those days. I went back to Wat Pah Pong the other day, and everything brought back this nostalgia, seeing the things that I remember of what Wat Pah Pong was like 43 years ago. And now it's quite much, very nice roads and buildings and whatnot. But it wasn't like that. It was very kind of crude and not very attractive. I mean, they had the ugliest cell I've ever seen in my life. And now the one they have is very posh, with crystal chandeliers. But my memory of those early years brings up nostalgia rather than resentment. It's interesting, because I know I suffered a lot. But the change had come, isn't it? The attitude towards the suffering I began to change, from seeking happiness and blaming my suffering on the conditions to understanding suffering. And when I understood suffering, then the conditions didn't make me suffer anymore. I didn't need crystal chandeliers or soft carpets or good food. I mean, Ajahn Chah used to mix up all the food, so even the people bring good food, it's all mixed up together, and then eating from your alms bowl. So you're just eating it like it's all, everything's thrown in there, mixed up, and then it doesn't taste good. And that's suffering. But when then the self view is, see, this food is terrible. I don't like it, and it's Ajahn Chah's fault for doing this. I get angry with him, or changing from its contentment with what is offered, and letting go of my discontentment. So training oneself in this way was to get beyond, demand delicious food or food served in a way that I found personally appetizing to me, and even though the food still tasted bad, I didn't make it into a problem, like wishing it were otherwise, because you're changing from this ordinary kind of unenlightened, unawakened person to your attitude towards the noble truth of dukkha and its causes. And so one investigates this, through monastic life. And the purpose, of training with the Vinaya and so forth, is, it gives you, it's a kind of agreements, traditional agreements on behavior, and movement towards contentment and non-self. So rather than becoming a Buddhist monk can be a prestige symbol. I'm Ajahn Chah's first Western disciple, could be a form of conceit. Me. And because even we can make, I'm senior to Ajahn Kalyano. I've had more pansas than he is. So I'm making a statement of my, I'm above him, can be a form of conceit. But is that why we ordain to develop more conceits, and take and grasp the conditions, That's not, I didn't ordain for that. That's not what I want from monastic life. So just by seeing that, you know the danger and the misery you create by identifying, attaching to even the conventions you're in, to Buddhist monasticism, to Vinaya, to Theravada Buddhism, to Thai forest tradition. They're all good things, but attachment to them out of ignorance also, the result is suffering. So the Buddha is pointing to non-attachment. So the insight into the second noble truth is letting go of desire. Now this is very difficult for Western people to understand, because letting go of desire means, we've got this idea we should get rid of desire. To be a really pure Buddhist monk, you've got to get rid of all your desires. You shouldn't have any sexual desires because you're brahmachari. You should only have metta for all sentient beings. You shouldn't be envious or jealous. You've got all the ideals of what a good Buddhist monk is. But then the reality is the way what you're actually experiencing in the present. And of course that is your karma, So in this form, our relationship to it is to see the desire, the wanting to get, like bhava danha. The three kinds of kama danha, then bhava danha is desire to get something we don't have. So we can meditate with the idea of attaining enlightenment, attaining jhanas, getting somewhere in our practice, getting samadhi. So meditation practice can be based on bhava danha, which is, and vipava danha is to get rid of defilements, get rid of anger, get rid of fear, get rid of sexual desire, get rid of desire. So notice that now, in reflecting on the way it is, that this realm that we're experiencing, the physical body, human body, the sense world that we experience through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, all this is about sensitivity, about feeling, about pleasure, pain, attraction and aversion, love and hate, and all the rest. This realm that we're experiencing in this form is all about sensitivity, vedana, or feeling. We're in a sensitive form, incarcerated in this sensitive form for a lifetime, in this realm that we have to, it's always impinging on us, irritating our senses in some way. So by recognizing, then the desire comes to get the good things and get rid of the bad. And then in the second noble truth, the BuddhaBodhivana is to let go of desire. But first you have to recognize desire. So it's not, letting go doesn't mean getting rid of it. It means when you realize grasping desire is the cause of suffering, you let it go. Just like this clock is, you just put it down. You don't throw it out because it's useful. But if I'm just attached to it, I'm suffering because I'm thinking I want this clock, being slightly absurd about it. But it is, attachment means that I'm, and then you should let go of your attachment to that clock. Then I throw it out, throw it away, or just put it down. Well, this is like letting go entirely, say ploy or wang, or put it down, release this grasping out of ignorance. So you investigate this grasping of desire, or like vipava danha, desire to get rid of things, desire to get rid of anger or sleepiness. We have a lot of trouble with sleepiness, with dullness in this life. Monastic life is very dull sometimes, boring, and so you can just go into a state of kind of dull state of, or sleepy state. So you go and live in the. I used to think this was nibbana, just staying like this, and if I could just get myself into a dull kind of samadhi state, then it was. I thought I was doing pretty good, but actually that's still suffering, and so examining, investigating, getting to know, recognize desire or danha. You don't get rid of it because this realm is about desire. These bodies are desire forms. So it's not about suicide or destroying desire, but in recognizing it, knowing desire. But desire can't know desire. So one desire can't know another desire. But that which is aware of desire, that's mindfulness. Awareness of these three kinds of desire. That awareness, then, with that awareness, then we can observe wanting something we don't have, not wanting things to be the way they are, or desire through sensory contact. We can observe. Like people say, they say, you know when you're angry, don't you? When somebody says something offensive and you feel angry, you feel, I'm angry. But instead of, so there's already a recognition, but then we're caught in the delusion that this anger is me, is mine, where from the Noble Truths, we're seeing anger as a condition arising and ceasing in the present, rather than my problem or my anger. So letting go of desire is not an annihilating destruction of desire, but recognize, you have to know, you have to study, investigate desire and attachment to it. So it's like they use this investigating, this word investigation, looking into the causes of suffering. So you see, attachment to desire out of ignorance is the cause of suffering, then the insight, letting go. And then the results of letting go is desire has been let go of. That's an insight, the third aspect of the Second Noble Truth. Now this leads on, we're talking with the monk at tea time about paticca samuppada, and so this dependent origination is about the first two Noble Truths. It starts with the vicca, ignorance leads to suffering. And but then the third and fourth Noble Truth is about non-suffering, discerning non-suffering. And that's the other side, where the nirodha side of paticca samuppada, non-suffering. So the third Noble Truth is there is an end of suffering. There is a cessation of dukkha. That's the Mariyati statement. There is the cessation of suffering, cessation of dukkha. And then the Bhatipata is, it says to realize. In English they use realize. In Thai they say tamhai jang, which means it's like practice with mindfulness, so that this is the path, this is the way. Make this so clear, this is reality. This is not some kind of dependent, precious state, depending on everything being what I want. But in the middle of Melbourne or out here in the monastery, wherever you are, this is not your mindfulness is not dependent on conditions being peaceful and calm. So then you through the letting go of the causes of suffering, then the result is suffering ceases. It ceases in here, in the mind, in the citta. And that which is aware of cessation is mindfulness. Mindfulness then isn't just momentary kind of flash of it's a natural state of conscious attentiveness that is not, is that you can't describe, but you can recognize. You realize it. It's reality itself. You're seeing. There's a knowing of Dhamma that is beyond description of words. It's intuitive, or we use the word intuitive. And it's always here and now, and it doesn't arise and cease with conditions. But our ability to be mindful, we get caught in heedlessness and reactive behavior. So the Bhatipata then is to tam hai jang, to realize, to recognize this and cultivate it through the daily lives we live, through sitting, standing, walking, lying down, through the movement of our physical body, through the duties, responsibilities we have in our lives, in the families we live in, and the way we make our living. Mindfulness, then we can integrate this practice of the path into the ordinary routine of our lives as we have to live them. And so this realizing, and then the insight, third aspect of the Third Noble Truth is this has been realized. Cessation has been recognized. So it's like a recognition, knowing in a very direct way, pure direct knowing of the absence of suffering. And from there, then there's samadhi, or the fourth noble truth. So the Pariyatti statement is there is the path, samadhi, samasangapo. So the eightfold path is used. There is this path of non-suffering, based on this samadhi, or right understanding, through having investigated the noble truths. So this path then is the way we live our lives, cultivating. This is bhavana. This in Pali, the way is to practice this, integrated. This is what bhavana really is. The word bhavana is translated into English usually meditation. But the English word meditation is a kind of generic term for almost any kind of mental activity. So it's used for almost anything. So it's not terribly, the English word meditation it can be many different things. But bhavana is cultivating mindfulness in daily life, developing it. So then this leads to, so the aim is to cultivate or develop samadhi, samasangapo, samma vaja, samma gamanto, samma chivo, samma vayamo, samma sati, samma samadhi. So these are the eightfold path: right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So that includes everything you do. And it's now coming out of samadhi rather than out of me, my view about Buddhism and my life. It's no longer tainted with the ignorance and this sense of a self, and I've got to get something I don't have, or get rid of something I have that I shouldn't have. So then the insight, the third insight is of the Fourth Noble Truth is this path has been fully developed. That's the Arahant. What is an Arahant? An Arahant is a human individual who has realized the Four Noble Truths, has realized the end of suffering, has cultivated awareness, and is completely, no longer in any form of delusion. So it's like I would say an Arahant is a perfectly normal human being. You think, we always say I was a bit of an oddball as a child. So people say, why don't you just be normal? And I often wondered, what is that? What is a normal boy? When they say, why not just be normal? And I never could quite figure it out, what that was. And I gathered it was supposed to be just to be like somebody else, because I didn't seem to be normal. But then, as you delve into life a little more, with a little more awareness, you see, there's no normality. We're all oddballs in our own way. You know, we all have our peculiar karmas to work with, and kind of strange habits and fears and desires that haunt the human heart. And then you think, you know, somebody asked me, a psychologist one time, about, do you have a standard for normality in Buddhism? And I said, yes, Arahant, perfectly normal human being. Now in Thailand, and oftentimes the Arahants raised up, you know, some kind of highly attained super being. So, you know, the Arahants, and then you think of these like Superman, or, you know, Superman, somebody so high, so refined, so pure. And that's from the conditioned view of an Arahant, seeing it as a kind of high state rather than a normal one. So what we're moving towards is normality, towards pure, towards non-delusion, towards pure consciousness with non-tainted by all our fears and desires, by seeing things as they really are, seeing Dhamma, knowing reality, the truth of the way it is. And so this is like what the Buddha is pointing to, not towards me, Ajahn Sumedho, trying to make myself a normal person, but towards normality, towards that purity, which is our natural state, you know, that we're not all these different conditions that we're deluded by, that we believe in, we grasp, you know, our individual way we look, the age of the body, the complexion, the racial identities, the gender identities, the national, ethnic, tribal, religious, social, it goes on and on. We get to separate and fight and to be jealous and envious and resentful endlessly on that level. You know, there's no end to misery in the conditioned realm. But this is non-suffering. And this non-suffering then is reality itself. And this is the great gift of the human birth, is that within these seemingly hopeless conditions we find ourselves, there is liberation from it. And so this is the essence of the Buddha's teaching, pointing the way of liberation. And I think I've been talking long enough. And but this Dace and I kind of encourage you to you know, not to just be a kind of perfunctory Buddhist, but this is something this is a great treasure, you know, something that is really, you know, probably the clearest statement made by any human being at any time, because it is very, you know, the way the Buddha taught, that Four Noble Truths and all that, this is something that we can do in our own lives. You know, it's not a belief system, but we need to practice with it, to BuddhaBodhivana, that means to apply it to our own suffering, to our own experience, and to have that confidence in awareness, to see through your own doubting identities, your thinking mind, your ego, your personality, and all your emotional habits, your fears and self-criticism and all that. Not annihilate anything, but to recognize. So what I've done over the years is seeing this awareness, and then my mind can start thinking up all kinds of things, and I know that's not it. You know, I know the thought process. I know the personal habits, the personality habits that tend to come up in consciousness. I know them, and I no longer, you know, believe them or trust them in any way. Because I know what they are. I know the suffering involved in getting caught up, in either following them or trying to suppress them. So in this way, the reality of the deathless. So when I started this talk, I chanted Namo Tassa 3 times, and I said, Aparuta de Sangamatassa Taura. This is one of my quotes. This is a quote from the scripture, the Buddha, that the gate to the deathless is open. Now this is like a statement of the Buddha, the gate. And what is the gate? The door. The entrance to the deathless is awareness. It's as simple as that. Mindfulness. That's the place where we can escape from the suffering of samsara, is through mindfulness. So I offer this for your contemplation.